Hello, and welcome to God Is, Introduction to Theology Proper. I'm Ryan, and I'm truly privileged to join you and journey with you as we engage the science of theology, handling in this course some matters pertaining to God. More particularly, we'll focus throughout this course on the introductory basics of divine naming, especially considering de Deo Uno, or essence and attributes, as people would say today. Although we will have a couple lectures at the end turning to de Deo Trino, or the Holy Trinity. So what are we actually going to cover in this course in a nutshell? Well, our first lecture is going to be foundational and divide divine names into their adequate categories, where we'll talk about basic differences between, for example, negative versus positive names. Those categories are going to be, roughly speaking, our three sections of the course. Negative names, such as simple, infinite, and so on. Absolute positive names, such as wise, good, etc. And then at the back end, third, just a few lectures on relative positive names such as Lord, Creator, and so on. And this is also where we'll consider relational names in the Holy Trinity. So straight off the bat, we'll handle quite a lot about negative names or apophatic theology. We'll talk about things like the rationale behind all of our negations. What's the underlying logic, so to speak, of why we juggle so many negations in theology? We'll talk about how in theology we particularly are concerned to strip out the universal conditions of creatures from God. Whether we're talking about the creaturely condition of corporeality or composition, for example. We'll also work through the purposes of negations in theology, asking questions like, what's the actual goal in using them? That'll be our first 5 or so lectures. And we'll then turn to the very heart of the course, working through positive or affirmative names. Importantly, and something of a highlight of the course, we'll discover that there are many different kinds of affirmative names in theology, and they all have different weights and values that it's essential we consider. So we'll talk about what these each are and also how they compare to each other. For example, what's the difference between saying that God is wise versus that he's a rock? Everyone knows that one is speaking properly and another metaphorically, but what does that actually mean? And perhaps more importantly, how do we assign a grade or value to all of our positive names that we say of God? For instance, saying that God is rock, lion, and so on obviously is metaphorical. Everybody knows that. But what about divine passions like divine anger? Is saying God is angry more like saying he's love, or more like saying he's a rock? As it happens, and we'll discover, divine anger also is a metaphorical name among many others and many different kinds of metaphorical names. Working through these issues is essential in order to both do good theology as well as properly interpret Holy Scripture. So that'll be the centerpiece of the course and bring us up to about lecture 15 or so. We'll third and finally close out the course by taking a quick tour of relative names, first in essence and attributes, relative names like Creator, Lord, and so on. And then finally in the course, just a brief glance at relative names that signify the 4 real Trinitarian relations, so relations in the doctrine of the Holy Trinity. So that's a super quick overview of the main mountain peaks of the course. And the intention here really is to give you the flyover of everything we do in theology proper. There's more, yes, but it's more of the same, or it's just more in the sense of being deeper and more technical. One thing you're going to quickly notice about this course, if you haven't already, is that this lecture series especially follows St. Thomas Aquinas and is a mode of doing theology which is scholastic and thus, for lack of better terms, highly technical. You need to understand that in this course, unlike probably the theology you're familiar with, we're pursuing scholastic theological science, which has its own goods, yes, but also its own rules and metrics for success, which are different than most metrics for success and different from most rules that everyday persons are familiar with and value. Particularly the technicality and preciseness is what takes people quite a while to get used to. That technicality and need for precision is, bluntly speaking, rather insane at various moments. And you're going to have to steel yourself for it and recognize both its values and limits. In one respect, to be sure, the goal or final cause, if you like, of Thomas's or scholastic theology generally is fairly straightforward. It's merely determining the true part of every contradiction whereof God is subject and giving the whole reason why, or more and more the formal cause of each truth. Simple it is to say, but very hard and demanding to do. We're going to go some of the way in this course towards this goal. But because of the inherent limits, we also want to try and equip you to keep going deeper beyond this course's conclusion. And that's why Thomas features in really a twofold way throughout these lectures. First, he's the primary author I'll be referring to for the substance of the lectures. But also, second, he's the primary author I intend to equip you to understand or even read in the substance of the lectures. To be clear, this class is not a course on Thomas or even Thomas's theology proper. It's a course on theology proper. But I want you to enter well into that theological science and also to continue onward and go further after we're done. So Thomas features in both these ways as a guide in class and also as somewhat of our goal for after class. And that means that I'm going to often refer to Thomas and give you many important passages, which you should take down and carefully consider on your own time, also in interaction with the lectures. The expectation here is that these lectures require quite a bit of your own outside work laboring in Thomas, both before and behind the lectures. And these things are intended to be done in concert with actual study. All right, enough of the nuts and bolts. To close off this brief introduction, I just want to give you two quotations that set the tone for us going forward, and then four quick admonishments or points of advice. Two quotations, then, which set the tone for our course. One should encourage you, and the other should discourage you. This first is from Sirach 43, 32 through 33. Admittedly apocryphal, yes, but nonetheless a valuable quotation. It reads, quote, "When you glorify the Lord, do so as much as you can, because evermore will he oversurpass. When you bless the Lord, exalt him as much as you have power, because greater than all praise is he." Thus, your encouragement for this course. The second quotation is from Maimonides in his Guide to the Perplexed, Book 1, Chapter 59. And this is meant to indeed be of warning to those who would engage hastily in theology. Listen to it seriously and reflect upon it. Quote, "If slander and libel is a great sin, then how much greater is the sin of those who speak with looseness of tongue in reference to God and describe him with names which are far below him, And I declare that they not only commit an ordinary sin, but unconsciously at least, incur the guilt of profanity and blasphemy. Close quote. Thus is your encouragement and also a little discouragement. But with that, 5 quick admonitions or points of advice as we close. Number 1, be strong. The difficulties before us are extreme, and you need to know that. Work hard, trust Thomas, pray often. Number 2, be sober. Know the values and the limits of scholastic or Thomist theology. It's good for what it's good for, and not good for what it's not good for. Third, be serious. Take the need for precision to heart. In scholastic theology, we don't mess around. 4, be silent. Consider being quiet in the process of learning. It takes a long, long time, particularly initially, to make real gains in Thomist theology. And once you do make those gains, be circumspect about your powers and both wisely and lovingly use them. And as you're gaining those powers, be quiet and listen to Thomas. 5th and finally, be startled at the wonder of what God is. Know that the difficulties of theology are in exact proportion to the depths of divinity. Don't lose your wonder and don't lose your joy in the heavy labors required. Continue to say with the psalmist in Psalm 86, verse 8, "None are like thee, O Lord, and no actions are like thine." God be with you throughout this course. Let's begin.